don't know if anybody else does this. Sometimes when I study, like I turn them in my own head and in my notes at home into sermons for whatever reason. I just do. And I do that sometimes. And so, but I thought I had something, and I started studying the end of last week and this week a little bit more, and I was like, nope. That might have been what you were studying at the time, but that's not what I want you. So I'm excited because I have peace about tonight and what he wants me to, and it's really spoken to me. It's really challenged to me. And honestly, tonight it's a challenge. It's an examination that I think that each one of us can do for ourselves. But I'm going to talk to you tonight about a commitment to Christ, making a commitment to Christ. Doesn't matter how old we are. It doesn't matter how long we've been saved. Maybe you're not saved. I've learned in my lifetime to stop assuming that everyone in your congregation is saved, even on a Wednesday night. And so one of the things that I want to look at is committing, because if we're going to go forward as a church in unity, then we've got to be committed to Christ. And before we can be committed to Christ together, you've got to be committed to Christ on your own. And so I want to talk about that with commitment to Christ. And when I think about commitment, I think about some words like dedication, loyalty. There's many other things that might come to your mind when you think about the term commitment. When I played basketball, I was probably too committed to the game. The reason I say that is because looking back now as I get older, it took a lot of my time away from what I could have done for Christ. And I mean, I spent hours I would be ashamed if I knew how many hours I spent on trying to get better. He's all right, as long as he's amening. No, I'm just kidding. But honestly, I would probably be embarrassed if I knew how many hours of time in my life that I spent working on my game compared to what I've spent in my Bible and learning about Christ. But in commitment, I was committed at that time in my life. I wanted to be the best. And so that commitment took time. It took my effort. It took sacrificing something, right? Unfortunately, some of that could have been my walk with Christ, but I was sacrificing some other things to make that commitment to be better at basketball. And so when I think about our commitment to Christ, it's going to take some sacrifice. It's going to take some taking time from other things to become more committed to Him, to be the best follower of Christ we can be, to be the best witnesses for Him that we can be. And so from careers to relationships, we have a lack of commitment in our culture today, everywhere. I see it daily at school. Kids don't know what commitment is. I don't like it, well, I'll just run from it. And a lot of it's learned behavior, unfortunately, right? They've learned from their parents, they've learned from their home life, they've learned from whatever it might be. And so that's why it's even more important for us to be committed to Christ so that we can shine and show what true commitment is. The term Christian is supposed to refer to someone who lives their life following Christ. Yet I'm afraid that if we look at churches today, many only follow Christ when it's convenient. My junior year, our basketball team, we had probably the best year of my 4 years that I played. We went 22-9. We were one game from Rupp Arena. We got beat in the championship to the region finals. And the very next year, it was time for tryouts. And I noticed a boy came out that a couple of us actually, it wasn't just me, came out. And he didn't play the previous year. And he kind of got in some trouble. And so Coach kind of said, hey, what do you guys think? He kind of left it up to us. And we kind of said we want him on the team, but we want to be able to lay boundaries. So we went to him. We said, hey, we want you here. We want you to be a part of us. But if you start this, you're gone. We can't have this around our team. We can't affect our unity and things like that. And so with commitment also becomes some responsibility and some accountability from each of us. And that's sometimes uncomfortable. That's not common in a lot of churches, holding each other accountable for following Christ and wanting to be committed to Christ. But true commitment to Christ involves a determination to follow Him all the time. we're going to get into the text now, but it says I've got 2 points. That's how you know I'm not a preacher. I don't have 3 points. I got 2 points and subpoints. But my first point is, what does the Bible say hinders our commitment to Christ? And that's where I'm going to in John chapter 12 here with me. If you're there, hopefully you're there. In John 12 and verse 42, John 12 and 42 and 43, it says, nevertheless, among the chief rulers, also many believed on him. But because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue, for they loved the praise of man more than the praise of God. So one of the reasons that's what's going to hinder your commitment to Christ, a desire to please people over God. I think this is a big thing that we struggle with in Christianity today. We're more worried about what someone else will say about us here on earth than we are what our Savior's is. And that's a big deal. I think God has allowed some things happen in my life that he's worked for good. And I never thought about this, but as I was studying this out, God brought some things to my mind and some things about like, hey, I did this and probably here's why I did this. And one of the things that came to my mind was when I was younger and I was in Little League, just to be quite honest, I mean, you can ask my dad, I flourished at baseball and baseball really wasn't my love. But it was probably maybe the sport I flourished at the most. And I had a really good year. I wanted to play catcher because I always want to be in the middle of the action. I hated standing still. And so I had a pretty good first year in Little League. And just to be honest, as a 9-year-old, I was able to throw it to first base on my knees behind home plate. It was just kind of a thing that just came natural to me. But then the very next year, I grew a lot that year. And I got a lot bit taller. I grew about 6 inches in about a 2-month span. And I remember we were getting ready to have our first scrimmage, but the practice before our first scrimmage, the coach's older son at the time, he was too old for the league, was throwing ball, and I remember I hit my first one over the fence. It wasn't just like barely over the fence. It was one of the longest at the time that I'd ever. Kids now have hit much farther, but at the time it was one of the longest I've ever seen in person. I thought, I'm getting better. And then I go to the scrimmage, and coach says, I'm going to start you pitching tonight, but I'm only going to pitch you 2 innings because I want you to, in Little League, you could only pitch at that time so long. They've done even more now, but he said, I want you to be able to pitch opening day. So I'm only going to pitch you 2 innings. First inning, 3 batters, 3 strikeouts. I get to bat at the bottom of the inning in the park home run. Things are going great, right? I'm excelling at this right now. Second inning comes up. I'm not making this up. I strike out the first guy. I strike out the second guy. I got a 1-2 count. I'm 1 strike away from striking out the side and being done pitching for the game. And I go and my arm goes quick, and it breaks right there below my shoulder. And all I remember is being face down on the mound. And then I remember and the sad part is Mom and Dad was on their way back from Lexington. They're usually at all my games, and they had to run something up, and they were trying to get back real quick, and they got stuck in traffic. But long story short, I never went back. I lost interest. God, Lord took my interest away from baseball. I never played again. And I look back at that, and at the time I didn't understand it, but it's like, you were about to go down a road that you didn't need to go down. You're about to go down a prideful road. You're about to go down a road that was going to take you from me. And he took that away. And as a 9-year-old, or I was 10 at the time, at the 10-year-old time, I didn't understand what he was doing. I didn't understand why my arm broke. I didn't understand why my interest for the game left me, but it did. I never desired to go back, and I did it. And so things happen like that. But he says, and God, if you're his child, you know this, but now he's not going to let you stray before he gets your attention. And I was only 10 years old. I'd only been a child of God for 3 years at that point in my life. And he said, nope, you don't understand it now, but I do. So just hold on. And so that desire went away. We got to be careful about pleasing people over God, because if we do, we can't commit to him. And so a desire to please people over God. The next little point I've got underneath that is in Hebrews chapter 2. Sorry, I've got a couple places I'm going today. Just bear with me. Hebrews. Chapter 2 and the first two verses there, 1 and 2. Aaron, you want to read that for me, bud?
You said 1 and 2.
Yes, sir. Chapter 2, 1 and 2.
Therefore, we ought to give the more earnest heed to do the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. For if the word speak by angels will steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience receive a just
Recompense.
recompense of the Lord.
I wrote down here, being distracted causes us to drift away. And there's a lot of things we can talk about, but a story, I don't even know if my mom remembers this. I do. And I don't remember if it was here or if it was somewhere else. But there was one time I got lost in Walmart. And here's what I know. Here's how I got lost. I saw something I wanted to look at, and I started looking at it, right? And it kept my attention for a minute. But then something else caught my attention. And then after that, I wanted to go look at something else, and that caught my attention. At this point, I can't see her, but I can hear her voice at this point. But the problem is, I kept finding stuff that I wanted to look at that eventually took me to the point, Miss Betty, that not only could I not see her anymore, I couldn't hear her either. And sometimes I'm afraid in our lives, we get so distracted with what's in this world. And I wrote down things, and you can keep adding: news, disasters, bickering, wrong order at a restaurant, TV, hunting, sports, fishing, hobbies, teens, video games, social media, and you could keep going down the list. But I'm afraid that we get so caught up in these things that we get so far from Christ that we no longer see or hear his voice. I've been there. Not a fun place to be as a child of God. Because then at that point, you don't know where to turn, Aaron. You don't know what to do. You feel alone. Blake, you almost sometimes feel like people don't care. And that's when depression starts setting in. Anxiety. All of these things of the world start setting into our lives because why? We no longer have touch with Christ. If we're so far from him, you can't even hear his voice to commit to him. And so those are all things that hinder us. But I want to look at, praise God, I want to look at the things that help us commit to Christ. Turn with me to Deuteronomy, please, chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Most of you, this is a familiar verse. A lot of people know this verse. Chapter 6 and verse 5. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. I shared a little bit about my basketball, but it consumed me. It consumed my thoughts, my time, my effort. I can't tell you how many teens, please listen to this. I can't, and I've shared this with you guys before, but I can't tell you how many sermons as a teenager I've sat through, and I don't even know the first word that was said because my mind was elsewhere. Who did I play on Friday? How did my game go last night? Because usually we played on Tuesdays. What did I need to do to get better? What did I do wrong? What did I do good? It consumed me. The thing of it is, though, if you flip that, and if that had been Christ that was consuming me, and I was thinking what I could do better, thinking what I did wrong, thinking what Christ helped me with that I did well, how much I could have grown in him. I was committed to the wrong thing. But a love for God will consume our whole existence. That's what I wrote down. A love for God that consumes our whole existence. When you're consumed, it's all you think about, right? Could you imagine if we were consumed with Christ? If our church was consumed with him, that everything that came to our mind, Christ came with it? We thought about Christ in everything we do. That's why I love what Brother Stephen told Preston. And I know sometimes that's hard because Preston's young, and sometimes we do have to teach as parents. But when I loved what he told him to do when he was trying to think of his service and say, pretend that's God sitting right there. Because I know sometimes I've looked like a lunatic going down the road because I'm talking to absolutely no one, but I imagine God is in the front seat with me sometimes. Sometimes I just need to talk. And so we've got to get consumed with him. How do we get consumed with him? We get his word. We know his word. We let him break our hearts. We let him talk to us. Sometimes that requires being still. And that's hard as parents, especially if you have young ones, because it's hard to ever get still. Right, Sydney? And so that's hard sometimes. But if we're going to commit to Christ, a true commitment, that's what we got to do. In Psalms 51, I'm going to take you there. I told you I was going to be a couple of different places all over the place. Psalm 51. Psalm 51 verse 10 says, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." At this point in life, when I was 19 years old, is when God, I should say allow, because God wanted to beforehand. But when I really allowed God to get a hold of my life, he's always wanted to. But sometimes we get in our own way. And I was 19 years old. At this point, I was playing college basketball. It was my freshman year in college. Remember, up to this point, my desire is basketball. It consumed me. I eat, breathed, and everything. And you remember that story when I was in Little League and how I just all of a sudden lost all desire. At that point, I had been teaching the little bitties, the 4 through 6, 7-year-olds for a year at this point, right before I went off to college. And I was able to get a car because Asbury had strict rules then. If you were a freshman, you weren't allowed to have a car unless you had a job or a good reason. My reason was coming home to minister, and so they did not argue that. And so, but you know what happened then? Caleb, I lost all desire to play basketball all of a sudden. And my desire grew to want to teach the little ones. It wasn't anything I did. I mean, literally just in the fall of the previous year, I was eating, living basketball. My desire was there. I still wanted to be the best I could be. I was committed. When I signed my letter of intent to play basketball, I was committed to go and be the best I could be on that team. My desire left me, though. Why? God said, you can't go down that road and be committed to me. And I'm thankful for that. And at this point in my life, I was at least a little bit, I was older. And so I was able to comprehend, God, I don't know what you're doing, but you're doing something at this point in my heart. You don't just take that big of a desire that I had away. And so but it went away. Why? He gave me a desire, thankfully. He did, not me. My desire was to be the best basketball player. His desire for me was, I instilled a love for youth inside of you, and you need to use it. And so that's what I did. I finished out the season, finished out my freshman year, and then I came home. Basketball career done. And I don't regret it. There's not a day that I say, I wish I would have stayed and played. I even went, and the next year, after setting out a year, I went to another college and tried out for them. And I went home thinking, I don't want to do that. I don't have a desire to go back to that. And so I didn't. Later on, one of my best friends at the time that was at that school, and I later still transferred to that school and finished college. He said, Coach was probably going to put you on the team. And I said, I didn't care. I didn't want to go. And so how do we get to that point? We have to make a commitment in our heart. We have to make a commitment that we're going to do this for Christ. And John, I wish I had wrote it down. Sorry, you don't have to turn there if you want. But John chapter 6, if you want to turn there with me. If not, that's okay. I'm going to turn there quickly. In John chapter 6, in verse 66, 67, 68, he says, wrong verse. He says, from that time, many of his disciples went back and walked no more with him. Then said Jesus unto the 12, will ye also go away? Simon Peter answered the Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life. A focus on Christ who has the words of life. These disciples, they saw Christ live it at this point. They'd spent enough time and learned. But I asked you tonight, where's your focus? Do you need to renew your walk? Do you need to commit? Brother Stephen, I really think he has a desire for us to continue to move forward. But we cannot move forward, church, as a church, if we are not moving forward ourselves individually. We will become a hindrance to the church. We will become a hindrance to our church moving forward. And so, do you need to make a commitment tonight? I know it's Wednesday, but if I can study it on Tuesday and he tells me I need to make a commitment on my couch, I think he can tell us to make a commitment on Wednesday too. And I know we're tired. I'm tired. Trust me. I don't know what these kids are on, but they need some Ritalin at school. But I wrote down, it doesn't matter if you're 80, 60, 40, 30, 20, 15. Doesn't matter your age. I'm a firm believer if you're on this earth, God still has a purpose for you. So we got to make the most of our time while on earth. In Ecclesiastes, I want to turn there real quick. Should have wrote that one down. Boys, if one of you find it, teenagers find it before I do, go ahead. Ecclesiastes chapter 9. I'm almost done. Good grief. If somebody finds it, go ahead. Chapter 9, verse 10.
Whatsoever thy hand
Thank you.
findeth to do it with thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave, whither thou goest.
I wrote down, a commitment to Christ is living for God no matter the cost. I find that the hardest thing to do in my walk. I want to commit to Christ, but my flesh doesn't want to consider the cost. A committed Christian knows that any other pursuit in life will fall short of the joy that comes living with Christ wholeheartedly. I've always said I become a Christian at a young age, but I didn't fully understand what a Christian was till I became older. I chose to follow him, but to truly know how to follow him, I didn't understand until I got up into my upper teen years. And that's when he began showing me things. And he began to show me that there's no greater joy than following him. The thing that I love most, he said, you're not even going to care about that no more. And that had to be him. Because I can't express in enough words how much I loved the game of basketball and how much I loved to play it. For him to just take that desire, it had to be God. And I'm thankful for that. I don't resent him for that. Because I truly believe he was able to take and mold my heart through that. And I'm going to close with this. And Brother Jordan, we can think about how we want to do prayer, because we can pray. If we want to come down the altar, make commitments, whatever we want to do, whatever we feel like we need to do. But church, we all have a choice to make. If we're going to go forward for Christ as a church, then we all must commit to him. I do invite you to join me to make a commitment if that be your desire. Again, it doesn't matter your age. I just tonight would like for us, if that's your desire in your heart, and if God's speaking to you, I would just like for you to go ahead and decide to commit to him if that be the desire and one in your heart. I know he spoke to me, and you can make a choice to choose to commit to Christ, but that it also takes time to let him mold our hearts to the point that we make a true commitment, not just with our words, but with our actions, with our studies. And I know as I'm going through this, and that the more you commit to Christ, the more the devil throws darts at you. We're going to leave here, and somebody, before they get out of that parking lot, their mind's going to be tested. That's discouraging sometimes, is it not? And that's where, as a church, we got to be there for one another, to encourage each other. But we all got to be on board with committing to Christ. And then he takes care of the rest. I appreciate you guys. I'm going to pray, and then Brother Jordan, I'm going to let you decide what you want. Fine.